And that will bring us to our speaker. So St. Paul's in Doylestown, every Monday night at 6 p.m. we have a step group and a literature meeting. And so this week we have Sarah I, who will be speaking on step 8 and 9. So let's welcome Sarah.
Hi everyone, I'm Sarah. I'm an alcoholic.
Hey Sarah.
So I want to start off by thanking you guys for allowing me to be in service tonight, and Ron for asking me to speak. I have to be honest, it's a little bit of a hike for me, but as soon as Ron told me that I had the opportunity to talk about steps 8 and 9, I jumped at the opportunity. And the reason I jumped at the opportunity is because these are the steps where my life was transformed when I came in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. I came in the rooms and I had this experience when I first came in, fresh out of state prison, completely broken and out of ideas, and I sat down and I saw God in you guys. I saw God working in other people. I witnessed God, but I didn't feel God within me until I had an experience with steps 8 and 9. When I started actually going to face the people that I had harmed, that's when I started to feel the presence of this Creator, that God that it talks about, that fundamental idea of God that is deep down within all of us, that it talks about in we agnostics. And it was this step for me was the turning point. And I know a lot of people come in AA and then they hear all about this big bad 4 and 5. And they're like, oh, I don't want to admit my wrongs to people. Listen, I couldn't have cared less about admitting my wrongs to people. I had no problem telling you about my resentments, my fears, and the harms I caused people. I already knew I was a scumbag. Where I had a problem and where I was terrified is when I had to sit in front of every single person that I had harmed and I had to admit my wrongs. Not say I'm sorry, but admit my wrongs for the first time in my life. And the only thing that brought me to this point was absolute and utter brokenness. Because honestly, unless I'm completely broken, I will look for any other avenue other than a spiritual one. I will seek out any other solution other than the one you guys are offering here in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. Because this is hard work. It's extremely uncomfortable. And if you have a book and you're following along, I'm going to start off on page 76. If not, that's fine too. The steps are outlined. I was taught in an order for a reason. I have to have a look. I have to have this inventory experience. I have to have a woman explain to me that that my problems are of my own making, and that all these people that I think are the problem, I realize that I'm actually the problem, and I've been harming people my entire life. And after I've had this experience and this awakening and this shift in perception, I have to recognize all these be aware of all these character defects and get on my knees and go to God with all of these things, because I can't show up to all the people that I've harmed lugging around all the ugliness and all the selfishness and all the dishonesty and all that stuff that got brought up in the 5th step. I have to make an attempt to bring that stuff to God first. So after I've said this beautiful 7-step prayer, I get up and it talks about getting right into action. And it says now we need more action, without which we find that faith without works is dead. My whole life I prayed for things to happen in my life, and I did no work, and I made no decision, and I took no action, and nothing ever changed until I finally was so broken that I was like, all right, I'm going to do what you guys are telling me to do. And it says, let's look at steps 8 and 9. Now, I know they get clumped together here in the big book, but they are 2 distinct separate steps. And there is absolute freedom in the willingness of step 8. Because there are reasons that we're not able to make approaches to people, and I'll talk about that in a little bit, but the 8th step is vital. It is vital that I have to have this willingness going into the 9th step. I have to make this list, and it says we have this list of all persons we have harmed to whom we are willing to make amends. We made it when we took inventory. And the comical thing about my inventory is I go in with this 27-page list of resentments, and I come out with a 27-page list of amends, and that was brutal. That was a really hard pill to swallow, that all these people my whole life that I had blamed for my problems, I had to go out and clean up the harm that I had caused him. Where it actually says, we subjected ourselves to a drastic self-appraisal. That's the inventory. It says, now we go out to our fellows and repair the damage done in the past. We attempt to sweep away the debris which has accumulated out of our effort to live on self-will and run the show ourselves. The word alcohol does not appear. It has nothing to do with what I did when I was drinking. Now, mind you, I cause a ton of harm when I'm drinking, but I can cause even more harm sober. because my real problem has nothing to do with alcohol, and I learned that in my third step. I learned that my real problem is my selfishness and self-centeredness. My real problem is that I'm driven by fear, self-seeking, self-delusion, dishonesty, all these other things, and they drive me, and when they're driving me, I run through the lives of other people and I cause harm, and this is just as true. It can be true at 8 days sober, 8 years sober, 80 years sober, it doesn't matter. If I'm driven by all of these things, I'm going to cause harm to other people, and the debris will accumulate and will build back up. Hence why I'm going through my steps again. It says, if we haven't the will to do this, we ask until it comes. And every time the book says ask, I was taught that as a prayer. So if I haven't the will to make an amends to a certain individual, I have to go to God with this. And it's not a one-time prayer. I don't say, dear God, help me make an amends to this awful ex-boyfriend. No, I have to go to God over and over and over again until that willingness comes, or until that person is just randomly in front of me, which, by the way, happens a lot. And you're confronted with a situation where you're kind of forced to make that amends because God has made that very clear. It says, remember, it was agreed to at the beginning we would go to any lengths for victory over alcohol. And it's funny, the work I'm doing with my current sponsor, and the work I'm doing now, I had to write this when we started going through the steps again. And because I forget that. I forget what it felt like to crawl up the steps of my old home group, completely broken and out of ideas and wanting to die sober. I forget that when I crawled up those steps and I saw you guys all lit up, I looked at you guys and I said, I'll do anything. I will do anything for victory over this. I can't live like this. I'd rather be dead than go on another day. I forget that because the outside starts to look good again, and I get the job and I get the car and I get the place, and I'm feeling better physically and I get money in the bank, and I forget that gift of desperation that led me to do anything for victory over alcohol. So it talks about, probably there are some misgivings. As we go over the list of business acquaintances and friends we have hurt, we may feel diffident about going to some of them on a spiritual basis. Let us be reassured, to some people we need not and probably should not emphasize the spiritual feature on our first approach. We might prejudice them. At the moment we are trying to put our lives in order, but this is not an end in itself. Here it is. Now here's this line. I had no idea what the amends process was about. I came in and out of the rooms for years and years, and I would hear those beautiful 9-step promises. And by the way, they are absolutely amazing, and they have come true in my life, and I experience them any day that I am willing to get out of my own way and live in these principles. But this line right here tells us exactly why we make the amends. It says, our real purpose is to fit ourselves to be of maximum service to God and the people around us. So I get those promises as a bonus. But my real purpose here, and the reason I'm doing this, the reason I need to clean up all this debris and all this wreckage, is I need to fit myself to be of maximum service to God and the people around me. So what does that look like in my life today? And if I ask myself that question, I can gauge whether I am staying current on my amends. Am I being of maximum service to my family? Am I being of maximum service to my employer? Am I being of maximum service to my community and the Women in Alcoholics Anonymous? And if I can't answer those questions, I need to do some work. I need to take a good hard look at myself, and I need to clean some stuff up. It says that it is seldom wise to approach an individual who still smarts from our injustice to him and announce that we have gone religious. In the prize ring, this would be called leading with the chin. Why lay ourselves open to be branded fanatics or religious bores? We may kill a future opportunity to carry a beneficial message, but our man is sure to be impressed with a sincere desire to set right the wrong. He is going to be more interested in a demonstration of goodwill than our talk of spiritual principles. So guess what? Nobody wanted to hear I found God when I first got sober, and they sure as hell don't want to hear it now. If I run through someone's life, if I cause you harm, if I say something terrible to you, if I hurt you in some way, I'm pretty sure the last thing you want to hear from me is, well, I'm walking a spiritual path today, and I just wanted to let you know that I'm practicing these principles, and part of that is that's not what I'm to do. It's about humility. These steps are designed to humble us. And being humble there's so much freedom in being humble. And I didn't know that. All this stuff about pride and ego, all this stuff we learn in 6 and 7, that is where we live in chains. That's where we live bound by this idea of self. So how do I get removed from this idea of self? I need to learn how to become humble. And there's nothing more humbling than sitting in front of somebody I've hurt and seeing simply that I was wrong. And I don't want to ruin a future opportunity, especially if I'm carrying this message or making an amends to a potential or active alcoholic. Listen, the last thing I wanted to hear about when I was actively drinking was God. I don't want to hear about that nonsense. I see a person now who's carrying themselves in this way where they're humble and they're saying they're wrong when that's something that's very difficult for me to do, and they're sober and lit up as a result. I'm going to be curious about that. So we don't want to shove this idea of look how spiritual I am and God this and God that. We just humble ourselves and just say those words, those most difficult words, I am wrong, or I was wrong. It says we don't use this as an excuse for shying away from the subject of God. When it will serve any good purpose, we are willing to announce our convictions with tact and common sense. And then it talks about the question of how to approach the man we hated, And my first sponsor, this woman, I will be grateful for her until the day that I die. And I don't even know if she's sober today, but this woman, she knew how broken I was, and she met me exactly where I was, and thank God for her. She made me write out, she set me up with these three lists. I'll make these, I'm totally willing to make these, maybe I'll make these, and absolutely not. And guess what she did? Immediately put me over to that absolutely not column and started me there. Because here's the thing. She knew I was so crushed and broken by everything that had happened, and I had made that agreement. I was willing to go do anything for victory over alcohol, and she knew that. Now, I'm not saying I necessarily do this. It's all about reading someone and understanding how broken and willing they're. And at that point, she had me make amends that if I got 6 months sober and a job and a boyfriend, I may never have made. And thank God for that woman, and thank God for those amends, because approaching someone I hate is the most difficult, or somebody I even dislike or feel better than, judge, somebody I look down upon. Those are the hardest ones to make. It says, it may be that he has done more harm to us than we have done to him, and that we may have acquired a better attitude toward him by our prayer. And this better attitude, by the way, does not come by anything I've done. This comes by my shift in perception that occurs in 4 and 5. I'm not capable of getting a better attitude about anybody. I'm just here to clear that up. But having done this work, that's why the steps are lined up in order. I'm starting to acquire this better attitude because I'm being given these tools, these prayers, this inventory. It says, sorry. I lost my spot. We are not too keen about admitting our own faults. So I'm starting to get this better attitude towards him, but I'm really not willing to admit what I've done. It says, it is harder to go to an enemy than to a friend, but we find it much more beneficial to us. We go to him in a helpful and forgiving spirit, confessing our former ill feeling and expressing our regret. There's a man sitting in this room right now. I remember it was crazy. I had maybe 6 months sober, and this woman had reached out to me, and we were fighting over a guy when I first got sober. It was absolutely ridiculous. We were a rap star who lived in a recovery house, and we were ready to beat each other up, and it was insane. And I remember her reaching out to me, and this man, I said, I don't want to help her, and I was standing outside the Northeast group, and he said to me, well, it's real easy to help people you like, isn't it? How am I fitting myself to be of maximum service to God and his kids if I can't clean up the problems I have with other people? Because guess what? We may need to be helpful to these people, and they may need, and in turn, as a result of this woman is a friend of mine today, and she was able to help my nephew get into treatment a month ago. She was able to get him off the streets of Florida and get him in a treatment center because he was homeless. That's what this work does. And I'm not capable of this. I'm definitely not. I need people like that to tell me and point the way, people like this gentleman right here to point the way for me because I can't see clearly. And so it says we go to these people with a helpful and forgiving spirit, confessing our former ill will and expressing our regret. It says under no condition do we criticize such a person or argue. Simply tell them that we will never get over drinking until we have done our utmost to straighten out our past. We are there to sweep off our side of the street, realizing that nothing worthwhile can be accomplished until we do so, never trying to tell him what he should do. His faults are not discussed. We stick to our own. If our manner is calm, frank, and open, we will be gratified with the result. I will tell you, going to someone I dislike or hate to make an amends even now is the most uncomfortable thing, especially sober. By the way, sober amends are so much harder than when you're first coming in. They are so much harder, and they're so much more humbling. But the reality is I experience far more freedom from going to somebody I dislike and making amends than I ever do than going to a loved one who I immediately know is going to forgive me, and I immediately know, I usually know what the outcome will be. And it talks about like this idea, and this isn't just for people we hate. This is for anyone. This is for a family member. I'm not there to point out what you've done. I was told that my job is to show up, own, say somebody did 90% of the harm to me and I've done 10%. Well, I'm there to own 100% of that 10% and forgive that 90%. That's it. I get two choices in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous in walking this spiritual path. I can either amend something or I can forgive it, and that's it. That's the only way I'm getting free. And it goes on to talk about money, and I'm not going to have time to go through line by line because it gets a lot into like criminal offenses. But I will tell you this. I was one of these people who just assumed, like, I was so awful with money. Like, I just assumed, because it's part of the selfish and self-centered nature of this disease, I want what's mine, I'm going to take it. If I borrow it, I'm never going to pay it back. I just assume, if you leave it out or you leave your pocketbook open, that's mine for the taking. I don't understand, like, if you don't want you should probably lock everything up because it's just like a buffet for me. So I run around like this my whole life, and it tells us, like, when I'm first getting sober, this was overwhelming for me. I owed everybody money. My credit score was like negative something. It was ridiculous. And it talks about, like, all we're to do is stop dodging people. Stop dodging people. And I didn't realize, like, I ran from this for so long. I'm so terrified of picking up the phone. I used to get bills when I was ever able to get an apartment. But I would allow the bills to pile up, and I just wouldn't open them because I'm so delusional. I think if I don't actually look at them, they don't exist. Like, my power won't get shut off, or this won't get taken from me, my car won't get repoed. And if a creditor calls and they leave a voicemail, I delete it before I can listen to it. I don't know if anybody's ever lived with their head in the sand on that level, but that was my life forever. And I come into AA, and I'm finally told I have to answer the phone for these people. I have to contact the student loan people. I've been dodging them for 18 years. Like, they can't find me, and they're the government. And I have to pick up the phone, and I'm calling, and I'm reaching out, and some of them I couldn't pay back at all. Some of them I started with these little $5 a month payment plans, and that's where I started. And the freedom that came with just picking up the phone and saying, here I am, this is my address, this is my phone number, I'm not hiding anymore, is something I cannot even describe. And like in the back, at the end of this chapter, we're going to talk about these beautiful promises that we get, but I don't get freedom from this fear that I used to have like this. I lose fear of people and financial insecurity. That doesn't happen until I actually make financial amends. It was so crazy, the concept of giving money away and actually feeling more secure about money. Because guess what? It wasn't my money to begin with. Like, it's their money. It's God's money. It was never mine. And then it talks about some of us having committed a criminal offense. I will be honest with you, I have 11 felonies. There's nothing I didn't get caught for. I was a terrible criminal. So there was nothing I had to turn myself in for. But it does talk about in the book about that if there is something that we need to turn ourselves in for. I've seen it. I've worked with women who have warrants out for their arrest. They're afraid to deal with these issues, and they run and hide from them, and they can't stay sober. And I've witnessed it, and I haven't experienced it. All I know is that anything I'm hiding from God and anything I'm hiding from you is eventually going to eat at my soul and eventually lead me to a drink. And that has been my truth, my entire life. So if I don't clean these things up, and as long as I'm not involving another person and not including pulling a co-defendant along with me and saying, they're going down with me, I promise you, like I sponsor a woman, and she had a burglary charge, and she was terrified, and she had to turn herself in on, and she has a business, and she has rebuilt her whole life through the 12 steps in God, and she was terrified, and she was showing up to court every month, and these were serious burglary charges. And she called me up a week ago and told me that the DA dropped every single one of the charges. Every single one of them. That's the kind of power I witness in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous when you just show up and face the things that we've done. The amends process is so powerful. It's just truly where I really get to feel the presence of my Creator, and I get to witness it in the lives of other people. And, and it talks about being willing to do whatever is necessary to clean up our past. And that's a hard thing to face. There's a lot of things that people want to shy away from. Well, that's the one thing I won't do. But the reality is, at the end of the day, and my sponsor asks me this all the time, how free do you want to be? If I am looking over my shoulder, wondering when you're going to take my car, or you're going to take my freedom, or when someone's going to find out about me, whatever that looks like, I'm just going to stay in a dark, dark place, and I'm going to continue to suffer. And it talks about cleaning up domestic problems. It says, it talks about like a man who's mixed up with women, that he wouldn't want to advertise, or any of us who are unfaithful in a relationship. How do we address these things? Now, mind you, I did not come back in the rooms with a relationship. But I will say that every single one of my relationships prior to me coming in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, I was unfaithful. Every single one of them. Because I was so full of fear that one wasn't enough. I had to have multiple partners. I always had to have safety net over here. And what were you doing for me? And this was all revealed to me when I sat down and did a thorough sex conduct. But the thing with the men, the 9th step, is very important to understand that there's except when to do so would injure them or others is a very important part to this step. I am not here to get free at the expense of another one of God's kids. I cheated on my first husband. He's one of my dear friends. We've been divorced for 26 years now. He has no idea that I cheated on him, and it is not my place to sit down. When I made my amends to him, that was not included. I was generally able to tell him that I was selfish and that I was dishonest in the harms that I had done. And as a result of that, I attended his wedding. I was at his wedding 2 years ago, and I'll be sleeping at his house in 2 weeks, so he and his wife can go to a wedding, and I can babysit their midlife crisis baby. So, and I have these beautiful relationships today as a result of the immense process and being able to say things and also not causing additional harm, because it doesn't matter if it's 26 years later. That's a harmful thing to tell somebody. And that's why we have sponsors. Because while this is a God-reliant program, I did not know how to apologize or do, everything I did caused harm. I remember being incarcerated, and I remember sending these 4 or 5 page apology letters home to my family and talking about, dear Mom and Dad, I'm so sorry this happened, and I've been lying to you all year, and I took all that money from you. But maybe if you were better parents, this wouldn't have happened. And I wouldn't be here. P.S. I need commissary. And that is what I thought an apology looked like. And so I need the guidance of somebody else, of a recovered alcoholic, to tell me how to make a situation right. Because if I go in on my own will and without God and without the guidance of another alcoholic, I will cause more harm. I can guarantee that. And it talks about practicing these principles in our home. It says this design for living is not a one-way street. And, how we carry this into the homes and to the lives that we live, because, I hear people talk all the time about living amends. Living amends. Well, here's the thing. I can make an approach to anyone. I can go to my mom and say I was wrong. I can go to my daughter, I can say I was wrong. I can go to the court and say I was wrong. I can go to the person I owe money to and I can say I was wrong. But if I don't follow that declaration up, that's all it is a declaration. That's all I did was say I was wrong. If I don't pay back that money I owed, I didn't make an amends. If I don't become a mother to my daughter, I didn't make an amends. If I don't show up and support my mother. Here's what my amends process looked like when I finally sat down in front of the woman I harmed probably more than anyone on this planet, my mother. I sat down in front of her, and she was not one of those people, and it talks about them here, the people who say, just keep doing what you're doing, just stay sober, just stay. And my dad's one of those guys, and he's fantastic. I love my dad actually said to me, he was he's a Presbyterian minister, and he was like, oh yeah, I've had a lot of people do these amends things with me. Apparently my dad gives money to everybody, and people are always coming to him for amends. And he was just, that thing, just keep doing what you're doing. But my sponsor tells me that's just not enough. In fact, it says sometimes we hear an alcoholic say the only thing he needs to do is keep sober. Certainly he must keep sober, for there would be no home if he doesn't. But he is yet a long way from making good to the wife or parents whom for years he has so shockingly mistreated, passing all understanding is the patience mothers and wives have with alcoholics. Had this not been so, many of us would have no homes today or would perhaps be dead. I'm one of those alcoholics. I'd be dead. I would have no home. I would have nothing today if it weren't for the understanding and love and the powerful love of a parent. And I'm a mother today, and truly a mother, because Alcoholics Anonymous made me a mother for the first time in my entire life. So I understand this absolute unconditional love and this absolute conditional understanding that I was given my whole life and I couldn't see because I was so blinded by my own fear and resentment. And this is the reason me just staying sober is not enough. It's simply not enough. It even says, it talks about this alcoholic is like, the farmer who comes out of a cellar after a tornado and everything's ruined, everything's demolished all around him, and his first thing is like, I don't see anything matter here. The wind stopped blowing. And that was me every single time I got sober. It was like, I got 90 days. What's the problem? I'm not drinking. Meanwhile, I've got 3 boyfriends. I owe everyone money, and I can't see my kids. And no one sees a problem with that, right? And but this time I come in, and even though my dad said to me, just keep doing what you're doing, my sponsor said I need to do more. And when I sat with my mother, she didn't let me off the hook that easily. She looked me dead in the eye and said, I need you to be a living example of this for your brother. Because my brother is one of us, and he still suffers from this disease, and that is the amends. And it's not, all amends are living amends, all of them. Or they're not really amends, they're just a declaration. That's it. I just said some words. So what does my amends look like? It looks like me standing next to my mother when she sees her daughter in the casket for the first time at 4 years sober, and comforting my mother and making it about her, not me. That's what it looks like, holding my dad's hand while he's grieving his firstborn child. That's what my amends process looks like today. Showing up, being on the phone with them, comforting them, talking to them, listening to them, doing what I can to be of maximum service to God and the people around me. That's what my amends process looks like today. Me just stopping drinking does nothing. Just does nothing. And it talks about this long period of reconstruction. And it has been. Like, there are people, my sister took several years to be willing to talk to me, but it talks about, we must take the lead. And it doesn't mean I'm to force this stuff down somebody's throat or make them accept my amends. The outcome of my amends is in God's hands, not mine. But it says in remorseful mumbling that we are sorry won't fill the bill. We ought to sit down with the family and frankly analyze the past as we now see it. And all their defects may be glaring, because my family's completely insane, and that's okay. And I played a part in making them that way. I added sickness to my family with my selfishness and fear and all the harm that I caused other people. And it talks about there may be wrongs that we can never fully right. We don't worry about them. If we can honestly say to ourselves, we would right them if we could. I have a son I haven't seen in 14 years. I made an approach to an amends through a letter. His parents do not want to hear it. I have reached out on multiple different occasions. My son doesn't want to hear it. All I can do is send a card on the same day, every single month, without my signature on it and some cash in it, and that's it. That's all I can do. I always believed that the purpose was the amends, was, that everything was going to work out. Everything was going to be okay, but the reality is that's not what we're told in Alcoholics Anonymous. I know a lot of people talk about these things, gifts of sobriety, what we get is freedom. It doesn't say we get anything. We don't get anything externally, and I'm going to jump ahead to working with others. It talks about, we're not guaranteed to get our family back. We're not guaranteed. It says, let no alcoholic say he cannot recover unless he has his entire family back. This just isn't so. In some cases, the wife never comes back for one reason or another. The child never comes back for one reason or another. And it says, remind the prospect that his recovery is not dependent upon people. It is dependent upon his relationship with God. My recovery is not dependent on whether my son comes back. My recovery is dependent on my relationship with God and my right relationship with you guys. And I do that through the amends. And it talks about approaching people and being tactful, sensible, considerate, humble without being servile and scraping. I get to be one of God's kids, and I can stand on my feet. I don't have to crawl before anybody anymore. I can look people in the eye. And then we go into the beautiful promises that we get if we are painstaking about this phase of our development. We will be amazed before we are halfway through, not halfway through the steps, halfway through the amends. We are going to know a new freedom and a new happiness. We will not regret the past nor wish to shut the door on it. We will comprehend the word serenity, and we will know peace. No matter how far down the scale we have gone, we will see how our experience can benefit others. Nowhere in the world do the worst things I have done in my life become my greatest assets other than the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. That is an absolute gift. says that feeling of uselessness and self-pity will disappear. We will lose interest in selfish things and gain interest in our fellows. This, for a woman who never thought about anybody but myself my entire life, to actually care what happens in the lives of the women I sponsor, what happens in the lives of my family members, what happens in the lives of my friends, is an absolute miracle. It says our whole attitude and outlook upon life will change. Fear of people and economic insecurity will leave us. We will intuitively know how to handle situations which used to baffle us. We will suddenly realize that God is doing for us what we could not do for ourselves. Are these extravagant promises? I hear people repeat that. We think not. Every meeting I go to, and guess what? For me, they are. And when I sat completely broken and unable to stay sober in the rooms of AA, and you guys said these promises, these were the most extravagant promises that I ever heard in my entire life. I never knew freedom and happiness. I never knew peace of mind. I never knew a life without fear. And you guys were promising that, so that was so extravagant for me. But I'm here to tell you, if we do the work, they just automatically show up. That is what happens. But it says they show up sometimes quickly, sometimes slowly. They will always materialize them. And this is probably what we should repeat every single time. If we work for them, that's the caveat. There's work to be done. Faith without works is dead. That's all I have. Thanks.